Thank you so much for having us here at the New School and for everyone joining online. And thank you for that introduction. So we will be talking about Up&Go. You can visit it at upandgo.coop. And we'll be talking about the development of Up&Go as a platform cooperative from our perspective at the Center for Family Life. So I'm Sylvia Morse, and I've been the project manager for Up&Go since 2016.
And I'm Maru Bautista. I'm the director of the Cooperative Development Program at the Center for Family Life. So we begin our conversation about Up&Go starting with where we are, which is the Center for Family Life. We're a social service organization that is based in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. We've been around for about 40 years, and we are a holistic and integrated agency that provides a range of services to our community. Our community is primarily immigrant, and the majority of people are speaking another language other than English in their homes. They're usually recent arrivals in this country. And have a lot of barriers to access a healthy and fulfilled life. So Center for Family Life offers any services from food pantry and tax preparation. Right now, our tax season is happening. So if you come to our services, you see hundreds of people walking through our doors. We're being very careful with the coronavirus. But yeah, the whole point of our services is to make the families thrive. And so since 2006, we started incubating worker cooperatives with our community. In the service sector, we've incubated 23 different cooperatives, including cooperative organizations that support worker cooperatives. 17 of those cooperatives are still in operations, and the majority of the cooperatives have been in domestic work, such as residential cleaning, commercial cleaning, babysitting, dog walking, tutoring, handiwork. So a range of services that are based on the idea that people have a lot of strengths and they have been doing a lot of skills and work, but they just need the support in building a cooperative structure to run their businesses democratically. Our model is about meeting people where they're at. So our training is in Spanish because most of our community is in Spanish. We use popular education. We use social group work methodology to really work with groups and develop the groups to be able to survive through the ups and downs of running and operating a business democratically. We have specialized technical assistance to serve the businesses that we incubate over a long period of time. So we start with a 1-year in-depth training with the worker owners, where we do training on cooperative principles, democratic and governance structures, and how to run your business, marketing, et cetera. And we continue to provide technical assistance over time. And we also provide back office services for the cooperatives that we incubate. Because a big barrier to running a business in the service industry is English. Right, like English proficiency. And so if our community is working to uplift the standards of their labor, but that don't have the English proficiency or the tech literacy to be able to do that part of running their operations, Center for Family Life has been incorporating that part of into the model since the beginning. This is a slide that was put together by the Democracy at Work Institute. It's about the elements of an ecosystem. And this is sort of demonstrating what happens in New York City. This was from 2016. So we were to do this analysis right now in 2020, it would be slightly different. What was interesting about this slide is that, we are in a city that has robust infrastructure to support worker cooperative development. And this is in part, not only from we've been at Center for Family Life since 2006. We've received funding from private foundations, including the Robin Hood Foundation. But in 2014, groups advocated for funding from New York City to be given to worker cooperative development. And New York City is the first city in this country to actually dedicate this level of investment to fostering the development of new worker cooperatives and support with technical assistance the cooperatives that exist. So this is just a snapshot of if you see we have business support, we have technical assistance, we have cooperative developers who've been able to use different models of cooperative to start cooperatives via startups, academies, conversion work. that has allowed our ecosystem to grow significantly in the last 6 years, and also be able to iterate in our models and think about how to grow this model even more. And so, because we've been able to innovate, one of those innovations that we have been working on, and the one that we're talking about today, is Up&Go.
Great. So a lot of you might have heard of Up&Go. Most simply put, it's a web app where consumers can book right now cleaning services in New York City. It functions very similarly from a consumer perspective to a lot of the big gig work apps that you might be familiar with, where users can conveniently book services online. The big difference is really in how the business is structured. And that's that it's ultimately owned by the domestic workers, right? So because we've been supporting the development of worker cooperatives, seen kind of the challenges and successes they've had with growing in the service market in New York City, we were thinking about how to make cooperatives more competitive. And that's through being able to compete in the digital gig economy as we're seeing technology really transform the industries that cooperatives are working in. So Up&Go is a cooperative of worker cooperatives who provide cleaning services. And so for those of us in this room and probably watching online, we're very interested in the complexity of cooperatives and bylaws and structures. But for the average consumer, when they're looking for a home cleaning, that's a big learning curve, right, for most people. So one of the really clearest, compelling ways we've found to convey to consumers what the difference is between Up&Go and the kind of predominant model of gig work and gig work apps is in the referral fee, right? And transparency around that referral fee. So on a lot of the big platforms, there's been news stories about, dynamic pricing and lack of transparency and how much are the workers getting, how much is going to the company. And from our research, we've seen that anywhere from 20 to really 50% of what consumers are paying could be going to the company. And that's, of course, going to investors that are not necessarily living in the same place that the workers are, and not back to the workers themselves. And in the case of Up&Go, it is the worker owners who, across their cooperatives, decide on what that referral fee is going to be. It's fixed, it's transparent for consumers, and that fee itself is going back into a company that's owned by the same people who are doing the work. So we found that this is a pretty clear way to get to the average consumer who might not be thinking about the world of cooperativism the way we are, to kind of understand the core values and the difference there. So a bit of a development timeline, both of Up&Go as a platform and as a cooperative, and how we've gotten to where we are today. So we initially received funding from Robin Hood Foundation to do a feasibility study for this work in 2016. CFL spent about 6 months working really closely with the cooperatives and with potential consumers to understand, like, what is the potential for this? In the beginning, what industry is there most opportunity for growth of a platform cooperative in immigrant worker cooperatives in New York City? What are the needs for cooperatives? It wasn't clear at first, like, what the value proposition would be for the co-ops and what would get them interested in. And so in late 2016, when we were able to get this started, it became clear that the focus was a platform that would help bring business to the co-ops, where they could really pool their resources and help grow their businesses and create good jobs. And we saw that there was most opportunity in the cleaning sector, where there's kind of least barriers to entry, and it's sort of a simpler process for booking, and consumers were comfortable with the sort of more instant booking process, as opposed to something like elder care, let's say. So we began development and testing in the kind of fall of 2016. The beta site was launched in December 2016 with a few worker cooperatives, cleaning cooperatives in New York City agreeing to test this out. So just as we were beta testing it with consumers in New York City, we were really beta testing it with the cooperatives, and co-designing it to make sure that what was reflected on the platform aligned with their policies, their services, and in the beginning really starting to see how this was the first time cleaning cooperatives in New York City had come together and think about like, okay, maybe we do need a shared cancellation policy, or how do you deal with this problem? What do you consider your cleaning standards, right? So we were starting to see that come together. And in May 2017, after we'd also worked with the co-ops to develop the brand and felt like the web application was in a good place, we launched Up&Go to the public. And after, continuing to figure out how the platform was working for them, an initial group of cooperatives formed Up&Go as a cooperative itself. And they really needed that experience of providing cleaning services through the platform and working together to figure out, like, how would Up&Go be organized as a cooperative? How would they make decisions together? So in December 2017, Up&Go was formalized as a cooperative. And then in 2018, the cooperatives were really in a place to think about how to improve the design of the platform, both to make a better experience for consumers, but really to focus on boosting customer retention and better reaching their target audience, particularly people who are looking for recurring cleaning services, which was a little bit different from the predominant message of a lot of the big gig cleaning platforms, where it's kind of like, get a cleaning anytime you want for not that much money, right? That's a very different relationship. So we focused on those redesigns and also on growing the number of cooperatives on the platform. And one example of how the development of the cooperative and the relationship of the worker owners and cooperatives to Up&Go has shaped the design, and how then design has shaped that relationship. In 2018, one of the big shifts that we made was in the booking flow, the process of when you get introduced to sort of each cooperative that's part of Up&Go. So what you're looking at here is an image from kind of an earlier version of the design of Up&Go, where for the first cleaning cooperatives who were on the platform, where they had, built up their business and their customer base the old-fashioned way, they weren't sure what Up&Go was going to be, right? It was very important to them to have their brand identity up front at first as well, and have consumers choose from a list of co-ops. And there was also an option that, hey, if I can't choose, they all look great, book for me. And through our review as technical assistance providers, looking at the data and conversion rates, and then doing additional user testing, we saw that this step of having to pick a co-op, considering how aligned the co-ops were with each other, this was actually making it harder for people to follow through on the transaction. And so with the cooperatives that had seen their business really grow with Up&Go, and by working closely with them so they understood the data, they then were like, all right, let's get rid of this step. Let's make it easier for people to book with us. And then we can tell the story of our cooperative at the end of the booking process, after they've, gotten set up with the cleaning and know who they're going to work with. So this is just one example of how the cooperative model has really shaped the design of the platform.
And so here's an updated version of what the governance and management structure of Up&Go looks like. So you can see at the top that what we've been saying, like, Up&Go is a cooperative, and so its membership is comprised of worker cooperatives themselves. And we have two bodies where decisions are made, one in the membership committee, where we have representation from all of the worker cooperatives. Decisions in this committee are the most, are around the issues that most impact workers. So for instance, like standards, cleaning standards, or like, I don't know, how many hours people want to work, or pricing even. Like, those conversations are happening at the membership level. Also, we're seeing a lot of peer network happening, a lot of knowledge sharing happening. If you know cleaning, the cleaning industry can be super isolating, right? Because you're doing work individually or in pairs in people's homes. You don't have that experience of sharing what you know best in your professional setting. And so coming together to these meetings is a beautiful space where they really are not only making decisions about the business, but they're also sharing best practices and things that are happening day to day. Yes. And then we have the board of directors, which is also has representation from the existing cooperatives on the platform, and also has 2 outside seats currently, with experts in different fields that can help bring a direction and a vision to the cooperative. That we don't have in CFL. And so CFL plays a role of coordination and development of these 2 entities that are part of Up&Go. And, we like to think about, we're talking about a platform co-op, but at the core and at its center, it's people. And so this is an example of like, we come together, we meet, we have relationship building, we have trust that has to be developed in order for this business to operate. And so the culture of Up&Go is very relational and very like face-to-face right now. And we're able to do that because right now we're still in New York City and people can come together. And so it does, it looks like this. And we're laughing because that's also great in life.
And so in terms of a few of the key successes, obviously we could talk about things that we think have gone well and like the challenges and pride we faced in updating like the cancellation policy and automated cancellations, but big picture successes, obviously like the mission of the cooperatives and of Up&Go is to create good jobs and improve the standards for those jobs by strengthening worker power in their businesses and then in the industry at large. So what we've seen in 2019, the average take-home wage for worker owners on Up&Go was $25 an hour. That's over double what most workers who were working as independent workers on their own were earning before joining a cooperative, and over 30% higher than the kind of metro area industry average wage. Also tremendous opportunities and developments in leadership development and training around like business management and some of even like tech literacy and marketing strategies. In particular, because Up&Go is a cooperative of cooperatives and each co-op has representatives in the membership and board body, there's a lot of opportunity for people in those roles to develop new leadership skills. And it's a really complicated role, right? To be representing your cooperative at the Up&Go level and then sharing that information back from Up&Go to the cooperative. And so this really develops people's skills from everything from kind of the basics of Google Docs and Google Drive and, coordinating and making decisions through WhatsApp text groups to, really big picture, like understanding the bylaws of Up&Go and kind of a governance role of a board member. And then the other really big piece here is that the domestic workers who are the worker owners in Up&Go own all of the intellectual property that belongs to the company. So that means that they own the Up&Go brand and all of its applications. They own the code base behind Up&Go, and therefore they make decisions about how that's used. And most of the way that plays out is in our kind of design decisions, but it's part of the mission of cooperative development is not just to increase wages for these jobs, but to add to real economic stability for workers and their families by building assets. And this is the first time that domestic workers have been able to control technology and a company of this level that also has potential, value as it grows.
So now that we've come to where we are in terms of understanding the history of Up&Go and where we're at, we wanted to spend the next minutes that we have here together to talk about some of the what does it mean to really create a worker-centered platform, and what are the tensions inherent in doing that? And so, as we know, gig platforms are, being used by consumers and being built for consumers so that there's efficiency and predictability and comfort from the consumer side, fewer buttons to click and then someone will do something for you, right? That's sort of how they're being built. So it's the idea of increasing the efficiencies for platform users and then expect people to figure out how to access those platforms and also interface with those platforms. So it's putting the honor's job in the workers to figure things out versus having a platform that actually builds something, taking care of, or taking into consideration the experience of the workers themselves. And so with Up&Go, we're doing something that is contrary to how people are working, right? And so we wanted to take this time to discuss the challenges and opportunities in actually doing that, because it's rooted in tensions and contradictions of being a worker-centered platform in today's digital gig economy. So the first opportunities or challenges are being pulled in different directions is this idea that workers are also owners of of the business, right? And so the workers have to like begin to balance those perspectives in being a worker and an owner of their cooperative and of Up&Go. And so the workers that are operating, and a lot of workers, we're all trained to just think about ourselves, right? Like capitalism is wanting us to be individualistic and make decisions just for ourselves, and that's as much as we can think of, right? Like there's no idea of like cooperation or like even thinking about like making decisions from the other perspective as an owner. And so this experience sometimes, it's hard we see it play out differently with the worker owners, and there's some tensions of having like both hats, right? Like I want to think about as a worker, and I want to improve the conditions of my labor, right? But I also need to think about this platform and how it grows and how it operates and how we make sustainable decisions that are able to still compete in a market, right? So this is one example of these contradictions, and Sylvia's going to talk about how this plays out or can play out.
Yep. So I think the most concrete example of the challenges of having to wear both a worker and owner hat that I've seen is in the question of pricing, right? So when you're going out and, we hear this from the worker owners, like doing the hard work of cleaning homes, which is chronically underpaid because women of color do it. That's what we're fighting against, right? Like it is hard to try to earn a fair wage for that. And the work can be really challenging. And so when you're thinking as a worker, you're thinking about the wage you feel you deserve, at least, enough of a living wage, right? And unfortunately, the industry that we have today and the realities of having a scalable, competitive business means you might not always be able to get the price that and the wage that we believe everyone should have. And we're pushing against that ceiling. That's what Up&Go is doing. That's why the idea is to grow the number of workers and cooperatives on Up&Go to try to take more market share and push the industry standards higher. And, you might be able to get some customers to pay that price, but can enough do it? Is there enough of a market there for the business to grow and be scalable so that these better jobs, these better conditions are available to more workers? And that's the owner side, right? Is the business going to be competitive and sustainable with whatever price we choose, whatever service offerings we provide? And so every business has to deal with this tension. And the great thing about co-ops is that it's the same people playing both roles and thinking about those things, but that's really, really hard. And we've seen how challenging that can be in meetings where people are playing out both scenarios and thinking about like, all right, maybe, this is the price that we can push X% higher than what we're seeing in the industry for studios, but let's try that out and see what happens, right? So that's just one example of like just what's built in as a tension and balancing act for Up&Go that we're navigating. And so the next piece is really around this question, particularly around like developing a technology company of automation and standardization, and then flexibility and customization. And so again, worker owners and Up&Go are coming from an environment where most of them were independent workers, and now they're coming together to make decisions as a cooperative and have standards so that those standards can be higher. And it's important for businesses to be able to scale, right? It's the difference between kind of like buying a mass-produced shirt and going to the tailor and having that shirt made for you, right? Like it's important for businesses to scale, to have some standardization, to have predictability. But at the same time, we've seen that in a lot of the mainstream platforms, that extreme focus on standardization to ensure that predictability for the owners and the consumers can lead to really unfair conditions for the workers. So in home cleaning, for instance, I think we can all imagine here, like you've been to different one-bedroom apartments that are different sizes or where the people living in them maintain them differently. So the idea of having like one set of prices that can never be adjusted, right? The worker owner has to be able to go into the home and assess the specifics of that situation. But as a consumer, especially if you're booking online, you need predictability. So an example of the way Up&Go has addressed that is having like a price range model so that customers have some predictability and worker owners have some flexibility to ensure that the situation they're entering is fair. So this is just one example of making sure that of how the business is always thinking about having standards and automation where it helps the business grow and helps workers work better, but also that they can maintain some flexibility and autonomy. And Maru will give another example as well.
So this is another example of decisions that are made thinking about workers and centering in the workers themselves. Usually, when we go to platforms, we select the date that we want, we select the time that we want, and the expectation is that when we hit book, someone will be matched with someone, right? That then that person will show to our house. But we need to think about what happens on the other end, right? Like in regular platforms, there's such a supply of workers. Like there's just so many workers that are entering that platform that there's this notion that like someone will be able to take it, right? And so that the consideration of like how much work someone wants to take, or like the flexibility of the schedules, you know, it only works when you have so many people, right? And like, then those people are not gonna get enough work anyway. So what we've done here is, so in the booking process and in being able to select and decide which job people want to take, when they want to take it, you have to have some flexibility, right? Like you have to have some predictability of like the work that the client can provide some information about when they want the booking to happen. But we also need the flexibility to be able to like check in with the worker to see like, does this work for you? And then like confirm with the client. And so this is not an automatic process. And so what we've done is like the client needs to put in 2 dates and 2 different times that are available for them, so that process of like, we'll get back to you tomorrow with a confirmed cleaning professional on the platform can allow for this flexibility for the workers to like make decisions about like which gig they're gonna take or not.
Yeah, and I would just add that this is an example of a design feature and policy that was shaped by the worker owners. So initially, there was only, submit at least 1 date. And then worker owners found that it was difficult to schedule. And then consumers also found that that process took a bit longer, right? And Up&Go's policy is to confirm within 1 business day, which again is a reason that home cleaning is a great industry for a platform cooperative to grow in, because it's a little less challenging than, let's say, booking a taxi for 5 minutes away, right? So what we found was that consumers were okay with providing 2 different dates as long as there was the understanding that, yes, you'll be able to serve one of these dates and let me know within a day. And so it was actually something that we were a little bit nervous about as consultants, about whether this would like make Up&Go a little less competitive with this idea of automated booking, but actually it's that what consumers value is just a predictable and smooth process.
The next one is a little interesting. As you know, so Center for Family Life is a nonprofit organization developing for-profit businesses and as cooperatives, democratically owned, but still like there's a different imbalance. So I'll start by saying, like, so there's a tension in how capital is accessed. Now, most of the time, the cooperatives that we were developing were low capital intensive. Residential cleaning, or dog walking, or night babysitting, they don't require an immense like amount of capital to get off the ground as businesses, right? Which is great because access to capital in low-income communities and communities of color is really hard to get. So when we were thinking about like how do we leverage our connections and our network and our and ourselves as a nonprofit organization, having done this work in cooperative development, we were able to, through our connections and through the amazing work, from the Robin Hood Foundation, to leverage those funds, that capital, to be able to support the communities that we were helping in starting their businesses and thinking about how to grow their businesses and bringing them to the digital, through technology. So there's a lot of tensions with that because, as operating a nonprofit industrial complex comes with like challenges of how funding is structured, how funding is managed, who gets to make decisions about that funding. And we don't say this lightly. We take, I think that there's a tension for us in supporting Up&Go, in being a nonprofit organization, getting access to capital, being able to leverage that capital so we can support for-profit businesses, in this case, in Up&Go. And so there's that aspect of this tension, and then there's another aspect to the tension of like how people perceive our work and the work that we do, and then what consumers are thinking about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So because the mission of this work, right, is to create a more equitable economy. And as Maru explained, the reason that we have to rely on nonprofit funding for to support the development of businesses in low-income immigrant communities is because of the structural barriers in the economy, right? Like the whole point is that the economy, they are being excluded from the mainstream economy. And part of how that plays out then is in viewing workers through a sort of charity lens. And that's something that, we're all kind of structured to internalize in certain ways. And so for me, providing assistance to Up&Go with user testing was really interesting in revealing these attitudes, which again, like we all share. And so one thing, for instance, is so we were doing user prototyping with likely consumers, right? People who maybe were aware of our work or some of our ally organizations. They were interested in the idea of buying services from a business with social impact. Okay, so they would, read in the prototyping sessions where we showed, mock-ups or versions of the website, language about the story. People would say, "Wow, I love the mission. I'm really excited." Or when people are working in nonprofits and hear $25 an hour for workers, that's great, right? So the idea of fair wages for workers is great. They like it. Then when we put on our consumer hat and you're like, I need to get my house cleaned, and you start looking at prices, you say, wow, that seems ridiculously high. I know I could get it for X dollars somewhere else. Like the same people, right? We've all experienced this. And so I think Up&Go is sort of navigating that in part because of how we've had to structure it, and in part just like the world that we live in and the things that we're told about people who do this work. There are other ways that, people were sort of expecting to see not just personal profiles of who might come to their home, which partly has to do with, other models of gig platforms and this idea of trust, but people also want to say like, oh, I'd love to know about maybe what her home country is, if she has kids, what are her hobbies, I want to hear her story, which is very much kind of like a traditional charity framework, right, where individuals have to sell their stories so that people can give them money. And the worker owners really pushed back on that and said, like, I'm not selling my story. I'm selling a service and I'm a professional, and let's tell that story. And we have found success in that. But again, like we were able to do that because we're navigating these worlds and making sure that everyone who has a part in this, consumers and the worker owners and those of us who support them, had a say in what the design was going to look like.
Lastly, and it was really hard for us to like really pick like a few balancing tensions, because we started with like 10 and we're like, man, we can't go through 10. So we're like just picking a few. But this last tension is about balancing the needs of like developing the cooperative and managing the cooperative structure and building that ownership amongst the worker owners, but also running a business and having the idea that this is set for growth, right? How do we grow this? How do we bring this to more people? How do we expand it? How do we think about licensing, for example? So there's this balancing tension, like it's a tension, I think, of how to balance like doing what we're doing best, building structures, building a foundation of this platform that is so strong and it's so like, I guess just strong is the word, that can then think about scale, that can think about even like growing beyond like what we're imagining right now. So that's a tension. And it's really a great tension to have because, it pushes us to think more about like what are the opportunities that are out there. But it's been hard to be supportive of the cooperative movement while we're also trying to figure out how to operate and run as a business and making this sustainable and, increasing prices, but also being able to do that in a way that, we can still compete in the market. So this is a tension that we experience in supporting Up&Go, both like ourselves, but also we see that in the worker owners that also need to make time, not only to run their own cooperative business, but to also run Up&Go, this, the second level co-op that they're a part of. So there's a lot of time and excitement for what we're doing, but it's a tension that we need to balance because we're focusing on strengthening what we currently have.
So I think one way that we've worked with the cooperatives in Up&Go to address this is in how the bylaws are structured. Thinking about balancing the amount of work that it takes to run each cooperative and Up&Go, for instance, right? There's a structure that allows for representation of each co-op. So not every single member has to go to every meeting about Up&Go or make every decision, right? And there's certain decisions that happen within each cooperative and some that happen at the Up&Go level. And one example that I think addresses this tension of like individual businesses needing to remain competitive, getting, focused on their day to day. It's hard to run a business and maintaining the mission is in how the bylaws address growth of membership. So at the membership level, which we mentioned meets monthly and it only has representatives from the worker cooperatives, and they really focus on their expertise, cleaning and making decisions in cooperatives. They will make decisions about bringing in new cooperative candidates. So if a co-op is interested in joining Up&Go and they apply, that membership body will interview representatives of the co-op, check their references, they'll have a candidacy period, and at the end do sort of an evaluation about how they've been doing in terms of participating in the cooperative, reviewing, their performance in terms of the cleaning services they provide. But they make a recommendation to the board of directors. And again, that board of directors has outside seats on it as well. And the mission of the board of directors is to support, or the role of the board of directors is to support the mission of Up&Go, one of which is growth and supporting the cooperative movement. So that ultimate decision about voting in new members or not, that happens at the board level. And this picture is an example from a meeting where the membership meeting brought in a new cooperative. And so there's representatives from 4 different cooperatives in this picture. And this is really where those decisions happen and where people talk through all of this. And I think people are always excited by the mission of reaching more worker owners and sharing that benefit, while balancing that with like the stress and realities of running a company, and particularly this new work of running a technology company together. So in terms of what's next and where we're going, so as always, growing the business, right? Reaching more customers, continuing to improve the technology product so that it works best for consumers. And again, particularly to make sure it's easier for people to keep coming back. And also growing the number of cooperatives and worker owners that are participating in Up&Go as well. The other piece we're really focused on, and this supports that first mission, is building out more and more of the worker-facing tech tools and providing training around how that works. So again, given challenges of capital, the early years were really about like, especially with the directive from the cooperatives of Up&Go, if Up&Go is going to have value, it's going to be about bringing work to our businesses. The focus was really on the consumer-facing features and making sure that worked, that we could like set up a cleaning, you could get to someone's home, and we all had the information we needed, right? But now, particularly as Up&Go has become really integral to all of the cooperatives' business and representing like more than 80% of jobs for most of the co-ops on Up&Go, we're able to think about like, what are the other values that Up&Go could provide to the co-ops and to worker owners? So thinking about integration with their different office systems, thinking about ways to improve and streamline confirmation of jobs. So adding a little more automation there, right? So this year, worker owners started to get more automated text messages from Up&Go. And actually, instead of having their office managers providing bilingual kind of analog on the phone support around between clients and members regarding cancellations, that seemed like an area where, hey, the consumer can cancel through the website and the worker owner can get an update, and that way they can cancel at any hour of the night, and we don't have an office manager in the middle. Like really small things that make a huge difference in the day-to-day work of the worker owners. So that's a big focus. The other piece is looking at expansion and partnerships. Every year we have a strategic planning session with board members and other partners of Up&Go and think about what are the growth strategies for the year. And we know that there's a lot of interest in, again, bringing Up&Go to as many workers as possible. And so one way we're working on that is within the existing kind of entity and governance structures, like bringing more co-ops on, but what else could that look like, right? And some of that's a more informal, like sharing lessons learned and bylaws with others who want to get this started. But there have been inquiries about like ways that the technology could be licensed and shared with others. And the cooperatives are interested in learning about that and figuring out how we can help sustain Up&Go in New York City and beyond. And then the other is just continuing to really focus on building the power of workers and cooperatives in the cleaning sector and lifting those standards and really continuing some of the consumer education that Up&Go is able to do by telling its story, and that we at CFL are able to do in spaces like this and others where we talk about our work. So thank you for listening to that. And hope you have lots of questions. Happy to dig into these examples further. And I know we'll be transitioning to a discussion session as well.